35 years. That is how long you trade your nights, your youth, and the quiet rhythm of your own breathing for the relentless fluorescent glare of a hospital emergency room. My name is Eleanor. For 3.5 decades, I was a nurse at St. Jude's in Chicago. I learned how to stitch lacerations while my hands shook from fatigue, and how to swallow my own grief when a patient slipped away. When my husband Arthur lost his war with pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, the silence in our small apartment became deafening. My life narrowed down to two things: the sterile corridors of the ER and the metal lockbox tucked away in the back of my bedroom closet. Inside that lockbox was my retirement fund, my life insurance payout after Arthur, and every single dollar I had scraped together by skipping vacations and eating generic brand soup alone at midnight. That money was supposed to buy me a quiet porch somewhere down the line, a rocking chair. But a mother does not look at a savings account as an exit strategy. We look at it as raw material, a bridge we build across the chasm so our children do not have to fall. I still remember the exact pitch of the phone call that dismantled my future. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn when my cell phone vibrated. It was Ethan, my only child, my 32-year-old boy who'd grown into a sharp corporate financial analyst, walking the glass and steel corridors downtown. When he spoke, his voice vaulted straight into the bright, unclouded treble of a 10-year-old boy who had just caught his first fish, shouting that he had finally found the house. My chest tightened with fierce pride. For nearly 8 months, Ethan and Chloe had been touring properties across the western suburbs. Chloe came from old money, or at least the glossy imitation of it. Her mother, Margaret, wore pearls to a barbecue and spoke in a tone suggesting everyone was beneath notice. Chloe looked at modest starter homes with undisguised horror. To Chloe, a house under $1 million wasn't a home, it was a social embarrassment. Ethan went on bubbling with corporate enthusiasm, describing a 3-bedroom colonial in Naperville with a great school district and a sprawling backyard, declaring it was the one they had always dreamed of. When I softly asked about the asking price, the answer came across the line without a flinch: $1.4 million. The teacup in my hand slipped an inch, clattering sharply against the saucer. $1,400,000 for a young couple barely 3 years into their marriage. I tried to warn him, keeping my voice steady like I used to in triage, asking how they could possibly manage such an astronomical mortgage. Ethan just brushed it off with youthful arrogance, insisting that real estate in Naperville only went up and they needed to move fast before someone else snatched it. 2 days later, Ethan sat across my laminate table alone. He didn't bring Chloe. Instead, he laid down a thick stack of loan rejection letters, credit denial notices, and underwriting reports from 3 different banks. The numbers laid bare a harsh reality. Ethan's corporate salary looked impressive, but their high-end lifestyle, the leased luxury SUV, the downtown apartment, the expensive dinners, had kept their savings completely hollow. Their credit scores were battered by reckless spending, and the mandatory down payment sat at a staggering 20%. On a $1.4 million home, 20% meant $280,000 in cash up front. They were millions of miles away from qualifying on their own. Ethan stared down at his polished leather shoes, unable to meet my eyes, before whispering the words that sealed my fate. He told me the bank wouldn't even look at their application without a co-borrower who possessed an unblemished credit score and liquid capital, asking me to step in. I sat in absolute silence, watching the dust motes drift through the afternoon sunlight. I told him straight that a co-borrower wasn't a passive guarantor, that my name would have to go right on the deed as a legal owner alongside him and Chloe. Ethan grabbed my calloused hand, flashing that familiar childhood smile, and swore it was just a technicality for the underwriters, that they'd wipe clean the moment they refinanced in a couple of years. That afternoon, I pulled the heavy metal lockbox from my closet and emptied 350 years of night shifts and emergency calls onto my bed. $350,000. Every cent of my retirement nest egg. We drove downtown the following morning to the sleek offices of the title company. The closing officer slid document after document across the wood. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the blue ink pen and signed my name next to my son's on the primary mortgage note. Legally, I was a 50% co-owner of a $1.4 million colonial estate. But in my heart, I wasn't thinking about legal definitions. I was thinking about love. The following weekend, despite my aching back, I put on an old flannel shirt and spent 2 grueling days lifting heavy boxes, assembling furniture, and painting the guest bedroom a soft cream. I scrubbed baseboards until my knees throbbed. Yet when Ethan walked into the freshly painted room, pulled me into a tight hug, and whispered that he honestly didn't know how they could have done it without me, something inside me swelled with absolute warmth. I could feel the sincerity in his voice. I believed him. Standing there in the half-empty room, I genuinely believed that every drop of sweat and every dollar from my lockbox had found its true purpose. I thought I was building a bridge. I had no idea I was paving the road straight into my own erasure.
In the first few weeks after the ink dried on the legal documents, the illusion of a tight-knit family remained intact. Ethan dropped by my apartment once, bringing a takeout coffee and talking fast about landscape designs and home insurance policies. But as the autumn leaves turned brittle and blew across the manicured lawns of Naperville, the rhythm shifted completely. The daily check-in phone calls turned into hurried updates once a week, then once every 2 weeks. Then the calls stopped altogether, unless I was the one dialing his number, only to be met with a distracted tone and a hurried promise to call right back, a call that never came. A mother does not stop showing up just because her children grow distant. We are wired to cross thresholds, to check if the pantry is stocked, to make sure the cold hasn't seeped into their bones. So, on a chilly Thursday afternoon, I drove out west. I packed my car with jars of homemade apple preserves and a casserole dish still warm from my oven, driving the familiar 45-minute stretch to the grand colonial estate that my life savings had bought. When Ethan opened the front door, he didn't smile. He half-stepped backward into the hallway, his shoulders tense, his eyes darting nervously toward the staircase. Before I could even untie my scarf, Chloe appeared from the formal living room, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her linen trousers uncreased by any real work. She didn't invite me in. She stepped onto the threshold, blocking the foyer with the posture that felt like a closed gate. She extended a cool, dry hand toward me, not a daughter's embrace, but the stiff, professional greeting reserved for an insurance adjuster or an unwanted solicitor. "Eleanor," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a practiced, razor-thin politeness that cut deeper than any shout. "What a surprise! Next time, please call before driving out. We keep a very strict schedule, and impromptu visits simply do not work for us." I stood there on the welcome mat, holding a glass dish of hot food wrapped in a kitchen towel, feeling the bitter wind cut right through my coat. I looked past Chloe's shoulder into the grand marble foyer. There were no family photos of us, no memories, just sterile designer furniture and a cold, echoing emptiness. I swallowed the lump in my throat, handed the casserole to Ethan, who took it like a hot potato he wanted to drop, and turned back to my car. That visit was the first of many subtle closed doors. Over the next several months, the pattern hardened into concrete. Whenever I was invited over for a formal Sunday dinner, invitations that came less and less frequently, issued more out of a reluctant obligation than affection, I was treated like an unwelcome auditor in my own investment. Chloe had perfected the art of social erasure. Whenever her upscale friends or neighbors dropped by for wine on the patio, I was systematically uninvited or subtly ushered out of sight. Chloe would lean in close, lowering her voice with a patronizing smirk, and drop a remark designed to make me feel like an intruder in my own home. You know, Eleanor, tonight is just a young crowd from the country club. The noise and late-night chatter really aren't suitable for someone of your age and delicate constitution. She didn't call me Mom, not anymore. To her friends, I was simply Eleanor, an aging acquaintance from the city who happened to share a complicated financial history with the household. And Ethan, my boy, who used to hold my hand in the grocery store aisles, stood right beside her and watched it happen. Whenever Chloe made those cutting, dismissive remarks, Ethan would suddenly find an intense fascination with his wristwatch. He would study the polished metal links of his band, clear his throat, and look away, refusing to meet my eyes. He never once defended me. He never once reminded his mother who had funded the roof over their heads. Instead, he chose cowardice, swallowing his mother's dignity to keep the peace in a house built on my blood and sweat. He surrendered his spine piece by piece, nodding along with Chloe's subtle digs, pretending that ignoring my existence was the same thing as keeping a happy home. It was during one of those quiet, humiliating Sunday dinners that the full weight of my reality finally settled over me like lead. I was sitting at the edge of the dining table, watching them talk about their upcoming trip to Aspen, when I noticed something terrifying. I wasn't a mother visiting her children. I wasn't even a guest. I was a ghost haunting the margins of a life I had financed. Every time I looked around that sprawling million-dollar kitchen, every time I touched the granite countertops or walked past the guest bedroom I had scrubbed with my own hands, a cold realization gripped my chest. My presence in this house didn't represent family warmth or maternal love. To them, I was a living, breathing liability, a walking, talking receipt of their past poverty, a quiet, inconvenient reminder that before the luxury cars, before the Naperville address, before Chloe's elite country club circles, my son came from a small, worn apartment and a mother who worked night shifts in an ER. They didn't want me in their lives. They wanted me erased. They wanted the money, the security, and the deed, minus the woman whose life paid for it all.
Almost 3 years had bled away since I last walked through that front door without feeling like an uninvited auditor. 3 years of scattered text messages, polite evasions, and holidays spent sitting alone at my kitchen table with a single plate and a lukewarm cup of coffee. The silence from Ethan wasn't just physical distance. It was a slow, crushing erosion that hollowed out a mother's chest, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache that never quite went away. Then, on a rainy Friday evening in late spring, my cell phone rang. I looked down at the glowing screen while sitting alone in my dim living room, and my heart gave a sharp, violent wrench. The caller ID flashed my son's name, Ethan. It had been nearly 6 months since I last heard his voice on the line. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed accept, half expecting bad news, half hoping for a miracle. When he spoke, the defensive edge that had hardened his voice during our last few encounters was entirely gone. He sounded breathless, almost nostalgic, carrying the soft, familiar cadence of the boy who used to scrape his knees in our old backyard. He didn't waste time with small talk or excuses. He called to deliver an invitation that felt like an answered prayer. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice carrying a warm, eager rush of air across the miles, "we're finally throwing our housewarming party next Saturday. I know it's terribly late and I'm sorry it took us this long, but Chloe wanted everything to be absolutely pristine. We spent over a year getting the interior design and the landscaping up to standard. We want you there, Mom, front and center." Tears, hot and sudden, pricked the corners of my eyes. The rigid, cold fortress that had built up around my heart over 3 years of silent rejection crumbled in a single second. I didn't care about the delayed timeline. I didn't care about the long, humiliating months of radio silence. To a desperate mother's heart, an extended hand, no matter how late, is a lifeline. I took it instantly. I convinced myself that the coldness was just the chaotic turbulence of young adults trying to find their footing in an elite world, and that this Saturday was our olive branch, the moment our family finally knitted back together. For the next 7 days, my lonely apartment transformed into a sanctuary of nervous, hopeful energy. I couldn't just show up empty-handed or looking worn down by my years in the hospital trenches. On Tuesday morning, I drove down to the local shopping plaza, the modest one with the discount signs, not the luxury boutiques downtown, and spent hours searching for something that would make my son look at me with pride. I found a soft, pale pink silk blouse hanging on a clearance rack. I remembered a rainy afternoon 5 years ago when Ethan had smiled at me over a cup of tea and said, "Mom, you look wonderful in pink. It brings out the warmth in your eyes." I bought it on the spot, along with a tube of gentle lipstick. On Wednesday, I sat in a salon chair for an hour, letting the stylist trim away the graying ends of my hair and blow it out into a soft, neat style. On Thursday evening, I pulled out my old leather dress shoes from the back of the closet, shoes I hadn't worn since Arthur's funeral, and spent an hour kneeling on my kitchen floor, carefully applying dark polish, rubbing away the scuffs with an old cotton rag until the leather gleamed under the overhead light. And then there was the labor of love. Friday night, the kitchen filled with the rich, sweet scent of vanilla, fresh cream, and ripe summer strawberries. I spent 4 hours standing on my tired, aching feet, meticulously baking a homemade strawberry layer cake from scratch. It was Ethan's absolute favorite dessert from the days when he was 10 years old, sitting at our Formica kitchen table with flour smeared across his nose, waiting eagerly for the frosting bowl. Alongside the cake, I spent Saturday morning hand-carving a custom wooden welcome sign for their front porch, burning intricate scrollwork into the grain and sealing it with clear lacquer, spelling out a warm blessing for their home. Every stroke of the carving knife was an act of forgiveness, a prayer for a fresh start. At noon on Saturday, right as I was packing the cake carefully into a sturdy cardboard box in my passenger seat, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan. I pulled it up, my eyes scanning the glowing screen. "Mom, please arrive at 3 sharp. Come an hour before the rest of the guests start rolling in. We want our family to be completely settled so we can take a proper, uninterrupted family portrait in the garden before the crowd gets here." A family portrait. Those 4 words acted like liquid warmth, dissolving every lingering doubt, every cold memory of past slights. They weren't just hosting a party, they were reclaiming our bond. They wanted me in the frame. They wanted the world to see that we were still a family, bound by blood and love. I was driving towards what I believed was the healing of my world. I had no earthly idea that I was driving straight into a trap designed to wipe my existence from their records forever. The GPS navigation icon on my phone chimed softly, announcing that I had arrived at my destination. I pulled my sedan to the curb of a sweeping, impeccably paved circular driveway in Naperville. The neighborhood was a fortress of quiet wealth. Massive, manicured lawns stretched out toward towering colonial facades, and high-end foreign SUVs sat neatly parked behind triple car garages. Streamers and festive floral arrangements hung from the grand pillars of Ethan and Chloe's mansion, fluttering gently in the crisp afternoon breeze. I turned off the engine, took a deep, steadying breath, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I smoothed down the lapels of my soft pink blouse, adjusted my hair, and stepped out of the car. In my hands, I cradled the sturdy cardboard box holding the strawberry layer cake, alongside the hand-carved wooden welcome sign tucked securely under my arm. I walked up the wide stone walkway toward the massive double front doors, my heart beating with a warm, foolish sense of anticipation. But before my knuckles could even graze the polished brass knocker, the heavy oak door swung open. Chloe stood on the threshold. She wasn't holding a glass of champagne or smiling with familial warmth. She was wearing a designer summer dress, her expression hardening instantly into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust as her eyes swept over my sensible walking shoes and the cardboard box in my hands. Before I could utter a single word of greeting, Chloe stepped out, pulled the heavy door half closed behind her, and blocked the entrance completely. "Eleanor," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a sharp, venomous hiss designed not to carry toward the driveway, "the front entrance is strictly for VIP guests. Please walk around to the side path leading to the back kitchen entrance immediately. We do not want your walking shoes tracking dirt across our imported Persian rugs." I froze. The warm anticipation that had sustained me through the 45-minute drive evaporated in an instant, replaced by a sudden, sickening chill. I looked down at my shoes, clean, polished leather that I had spent hours scrubbing the night before. I swallowed the thick, bitter lump rising in my throat, refusing to lower myself to a shouting match on the front porch. Without a word, I turned around, walked back down the grand stone steps, and balanced the heavy cake box as I picked my way carefully along the narrow gravel side path that led around the sprawling side of the mansion toward the backyard patio. The contrast between the front and the back was jarring. A couple of dozen guests, men in tailored linen suits and women sparkling with heavy diamond jewelry, mingled around an expansive outdoor kitchen and a glistening stone pool. At the center of it all stood Margaret, Chloe's mother, draped in pearls and heavy designer jewelry, holding court near the outdoor bar like a queen surveying her subjects, directing servants and guests with effortless arrogance. Ethan stood a few feet away, holding a crystal flute of champagne. When he caught sight of me shuffling around the corner of the house, holding a makeshift box and a wooden sign, his laughter died instantly. His face flushed a deep, uncomfortable crimson. His eyes darted nervously toward Margaret, then toward the group of senior partners from his firm, standing nearby. He took half a step forward as if to intercept me, but stopped dead in his tracks the second Margaret turned her sharp, disapproving gaze in his direction. Then came the photographer. A young man with an expensive digital camera slung over his shoulder shouted loudly across the patio, signaling for the core family to gather by the garden arch for an official portrait before the main evening crowd arrived. Chloe glided over, hooking her arm smoothly through Ethan's, while Margaret stepped in right beside them, completing the picture-perfect tableau of elite suburban success. I stood awkwardly near the edge of the patio, holding the cake box like a shield, expecting that the family portrait I had been explicitly summoned an hour earlier for would finally include me. Instead, Chloe's eyes scanned over me with clinical indifference. She whispered something sharply into Ethan's ear. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and looked away with a look of miserable cowardice, completely unable to meet my eyes or offer even a shred of defense. As the photographer raised his lens and called out for everyone to squeeze in closer, Chloe stepped forward, took me firmly by the elbow, and physically guided me away from the group, placing me behind the thick trunk of a massive oak tree at the edge of the lawn, completely hidden from the main view. Chloe smiled her brightest, most sickeningly sweet public smile for the surrounding guests and said, "You should stand right back here, Eleanor. The lighting from behind this foliage is much more artistic, and it ensures we don't accidentally clutter the main composition of the family portrait." I didn't move. My feet felt glued to the flagstones as the bitter reality washed over me. "Go on, Mom," Ethan muttered under his breath, refusing to look me in the eye as he gestured vaguely toward the dark, shadowed perimeter of the lawn. "Just stand back there for a minute. Make it easier for everyone." Humiliation didn't hit me as rage. It hit me as a profound, freezing numbness. I turned away from the bright lights, the expensive camera, and the smiling faces. I stood entirely alone behind the rough bark of the ancient oak tree, looking through the dense cluster of green leaves. I watched through the camera lens as the flash went off, capturing a picture-perfect family portrait of wealth, status, and absolute betrayal, with me hidden completely in the dark, erased from the very life I had financed with my entire life's work. 20 minutes. I stood frozen in the deep shadow of that grand oak tree for 20 full minutes, unable to move, unable to even catch my breath. The evening breeze felt like ice, cutting right through my clothes. But I didn't feel cold. I only felt the heavy, unrelenting weight of tears soaking through the fabric of the new shirt I had carefully chosen for this night, a shirt I thought would make me proud to stand beside my son. Instead, it just soaked up the silent grief of a mother who'd already lost everything. My mind was completely shattered, drained of every last ounce of spirit. I couldn't stay by that party lawn anymore. The laughter, the clinking crystal glasses, the bright, blinding lights, it was all too loud, too fake, too cruel. My legs carried me blindly away from the music, dragging me toward a quiet, secluded stone bench tucked away near the back of the estate's massive garage. It was a dark, forgotten corner, far enough away from the celebration for me to finally catch my breath, or at least try to piece together whatever dignity I had left. What I didn't know was that this specific architectural corner, the angle where the stone garage wall met the high perimeter fence, formed a natural, cruel acoustic tunnel. It was a makeshift megaphone that funneled every single word, every breath, and every harsh whisper straight from the private patio seating area directly into my lap. I didn't mean to listen. At first, the sound was just a low, muffled hum, but then distinct footsteps crunched on the gravel, followed immediately by voices I would recognize anywhere in this world. Margaret, Chloe, and my son, Ethan. They thought they were completely hidden in the shadows of the patio. They had no idea I was sitting just yards away, separated only by a thin, echoing wall. Margaret's voice cut through the cool night air like a jagging piece of glass, sharp, venomous, and entirely stripped of any social pretense. "Ethan, you need to deal with that country bumpkin old woman once and for all," Margaret snapped, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. She keeps wandering around, looking completely out of place and making the guests uncomfortable. Just the sight of that pathetic, dirt-poor demeanor reminds everyone of your real background, where you crawled from before our family stepped in and funded your entire existence. I sat there on that cold stone bench, my hands clenched so tightly into my palms that my fingernails dug deep into my palms. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had suddenly stopped, replaced by a strange, heavy numbness creeping into my chest. Then Chloe chimed in, her voice ringing out with that same cruel, entitled smugness that had always made my stomach turn. She's right, Ethan. Let's be completely honest here. That initial $350,000 investment wasn't a gift. It was just a messy debt settlement your bankrupt parents owed us. We graciously allowed her to step foot inside these gates tonight, and honestly, that was already the peak of our mercy. As for her name being on the deed, let's not kid ourselves. That was never a permanent arrangement. It was just a temporary legal loophole to keep the tax authorities off our backs. Next week, you are marching straight to the lawyer's office to sign those refinance papers. You need to kick her out and strip her name off that title completely. Only then will we be the true, undisputed owners of this estate. I waited in the dark, my heart hanging by a single fraying thread. I waited for Ethan to speak up. I waited for my son, the boy I had raised through endless winters, the boy I had given every single sacrifice, every single penny, and every drop of my youth to defend me. Just one word, just a single sentence of protest. When Ethan's voice finally answered, it wasn't anger that filled it. It was a weak, pathetic, trembling cowardice. I know, I'm already working on the paperwork with the attorneys. Just give me a little more time to handle her. I need to trick her into signing away her rights quietly, without causing a messy scene in front of our social circle. Without causing a messy scene. Those 6 words didn't just hurt. Inside my chest, right behind my ribs, something snapped with a dry, definitive crack. A profound, irreversible collapse. It wasn't just trust that broke in that moment. It was the entire foundation of my life's work, my sacrifices, and my unconditional love. The burning agony of betrayal suddenly faded away, replaced by an absolute chilling silence, a cold, razor-sharp stillness. Every ounce of patience, every instinct to forgive, and every lingering shred of maternal tolerance I had carried through decades of hardship was instantly scorched to ash by the sheer unadulterated cruelty of the son I had birthed with my own flesh and blood. They wanted a war without a scene. They were about to get a reckoning they could never run away from. I did not retreat to the cold stone bench to weep, nor did I let the humiliation swallow me whole in the shadows. There is a precise, freezing clarity that settles into your bones when you have survived enough betrayals to know that grief is a luxury reserved for the weak. I stood up, smoothing the creases of my jacket with deliberate, unhurried motions. My hands did not tremble. The tremors belonged to a past version of me, the one who still believed in bloodlines and unconditional maternal sacrifices. I walked straight toward the front porch, stepping out from the dimness of the foyer into the brilliant, unforgiving glare of the afternoon sun. On the wide stone terrace, a cluster of Ethan's old colleagues and former acquaintances had gathered, holding crystal glasses filled with amber whiskey and imported wine. Among them stood Mark, a senior corporate real estate attorney who had personally overseen the original property acquisition and escrow filings years ago, back when Ethan was still just a junior analyst, drowning in debt and desperate for a roof over his head. Mark caught sight of me stepping out into the open air, and instead of shrinking away or pretending not to notice the tension radiating from the doorway, he raised his voice, his tone booming with genuine, unmasked professional respect that cut sharply through the cocktail chatter. "Well, look who it is, Eleanor herself," Mark called out, addressing the surrounding guests with a grin that carried the weight of historical truth. "Our brilliant financial advisor and the official co-owner of this very estate, in case any of you new socialites are wondering. If it wasn't for her signature, her tireless auditing, and her hard-earned capital injection, this multi-million-dollar mansion would never have belonged to Ethan in the first place." The laughter and casual clinking of glasses instantly died down, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence that hung thick in the humid air. Before Mark could elaborate further, Chloe burst through the front double doors, her face completely drained of color, her eyes wide with animal panic as she sprinted across the stone patio like a woman fleeing a burning building. She lunged forward, physically thrusting herself between Mark and the guests, her voice cracking with a desperate, frantic shrillness. "Mark, please stop talking absolute nonsense about private family matters out here in public. This is supposed to be a celebration, not a place for your drunken hallucinations." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, nor did I indulge in the vulgarity of screaming matches or public hysterics. I simply stepped past Chloe, as if she were nothing more than a passing shadow on the wall, my gaze fixed, sharp, and absolute. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat and drew out a crisp, heavy-stocked manila envelope bearing the official purple seal of the county recorder's office and a certified copy of the credit deeds and land survey maps registered under my name. The guests turned in unison, staring at the documents in my hands with a mixture of shock, confusion, and morbid curiosity. I spoke clearly, every syllable cutting through the ambient noise of the estate like a scalpel through linen. "There is nothing private about fraud, Chloe," I said, my voice steady, low, and carrying an unshakable authority that commanded the entire courtyard. "And Mark is speaking absolute truth. I am not a stray guest wandering in off the street, nor am I a beggar looking for charity handouts. I am the legal co-owner holding a verified 50% equity share of this property, bought and paid for with my retirement funds, my life savings, and the sweat of my own labor." I turned my head slowly, shifting my gaze from the stunned crowd to look straight into the eyes of my son, Ethan, the man who had traded his conscience for a high-end social ladder, now standing frozen on the top step, his knees shaking so violently he had to grip the wrought iron railing for physical support. "You thought you could quietly erase my name from the title registry? You thought you could render me invisible just because your new life requires a cleaner, more sterile backstory?" I stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking until he could see the cold, unyielding resolve burning in my eyes. "Don't wait until next week, Ethan. Don't hide behind lawyers or waiting periods. Today, right here, right now, in front of everyone who matters to your precious new reputation, the final choice is laid out before you. Either you sign the immediate liquidation papers to sell this estate this afternoon so we can split the assets according to current market value, or you dig deep into your own pockets and buy out my exact 50% share in full by the end of this week." For a second, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Then Margaret came rushing out of the house, her face distorted with rage, screeching at the top of her lungs that I was a lunatic trespassing on private property, threatening to call the police to have me dragged away for harassment and disturbing the peace. But the spell of their illusion was already shattered. Mark and the other high-ranking guests exchanged knowing, cynical glances, their expressions shifting instantly from polite curiosity to undisguised contempt and disgust as they looked at Ethan and his mother-in-law. They saw the truth written plainly in the panic sweating from Ethan's pores and the desperation twisting Chloe's face. I did not wait for their excuses, nor did I wait for the police to arrive. I turned my back on them with slow, deliberate grace, letting the heavy oak doors click shut behind me as I walked down the driveway. I left them standing amid the ruins of their expensive, hollow housewarming party, a celebration completely hollowed out, drowning in the bitter, burning taste of humiliation, exposure, and absolute defeat. The notification on my lawyer's desk didn't knock. It struck like a gavel falling in an empty courtroom. First thing the next morning, my private attorney formally filed a partition action in the county court, legally demanding the forced sale and division of the property. At the exact same hour, every joint account tied to Ethan's reckless spending was frozen cold. There was no shouting match left in me, only the steady rhythm of a mother refusing to finance her own destruction any longer. Years of quiet sacrifice, late nights working double shifts, and every penny I had carefully set aside for my golden years had been systematically bled dry to fund a lifestyle built entirely on vanity. Ethan had assumed my unconditional love meant unconditional compliance, a dangerous miscalculation that had finally reached its absolute limit. The legal shockwave hit Ethan with the force of a falling beam. The initial notice arrived while he was at the office, resulting in an immediate public humiliation as his corporate access cards were deactivated alongside his personal finances. And Chloe? The moment the bank cards declined and the asset freeze hit the public docket, her opportunistic loyalty dissolved into thin air. Within less than a week, she filed for divorce, her legal filings painting Ethan as incompetent, penniless, and tied to a sinking ship. She stripped the master bedroom down to the bare drywall, packed her designer bags, and vanished without leaving a forwarding address. Her mother, Margaret, whose purse strings had always dictated Chloe's affection, cut off every cent of financial lifeline the second the family name became toxic in polite society. The grand illusion of their high society marriage evaporated overnight, leaving behind only the cold reality of mutual betrayal. Ethan lost his wife, lost his roof, and lost whatever shred of professional reputation he had left clinging to him at the firm. Colleagues who had once flattered him for his connections suddenly found urgent reasons to look away in the hallways. The $1.4 million house didn't linger on the market. The court ordered an expedited judicial auction to satisfy the partition demands. By the time the dust settled, the years of accumulated market equity worked entirely in my favor, bypassing Ethan's destructive entitlement entirely. After clearing every legal fee, court cost, and penalty, the net payout returned to my hands was substantial, more than enough to secure a lifetime of absolute peace and quiet, far away from the wreckage of entitlement. I purchased a modest, sunlit cottage near the coast, where the only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. 6 months slipped like a quiet winter, bringing a profound sense of restoration to my spirit. I filled my days with long overdue hobbies, tending to a sprawling garden in the backyard and breathing in air untainted by anxiety or manipulation. The constant knot in my stomach that had lived there for years finally unspooled, replaced by an unfamiliar, tranquil calm. I had learned to enjoy my own company, realizing that solitude was infinitely superior to the suffocating noise of living with ungrateful company. Then came a knock on my front door that sounded less like a visitor and more like a total collapse. It was late afternoon, the autumn wind rattling the wind chimes on the porch. I hesitated for a moment before stepping into the hallway, pulling back the sheer curtain to look out into the driveway. I opened it to find Ethan standing on the welcome mat, hollow-eyed, trembling in a worn-out winter coat that was far too thin for the biting chill. He was completely hollowed out by months of unemployment, eviction notices, and utter despair. The arrogance that had once defined his posture was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic hunch. Before I could even draw a breath, he dropped violently to his knees on the cold concrete step, his shoulders shaking with ragged, desperate sobs. He began begging for a mother's forgiveness, begging for a room, a bed, a single corner to hide from the harsh realities of the world he had chosen to build. I looked down at the boy who had once traded my safety for a moment of social validation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush forward to pull him up or offer a comforting hand. I simply looked down from the threshold, letting the heavy silence carry the weight of everything we both had broken. I spent my entire life being your shield, protecting you from every storm, only for you to push me straight into the dark. The real storms of this life are yours to weather now, Ethan. True maternal love was never meant to be an installment plan to pay off the debts of your own betrayal. I pulled the heavy oak door closed, sliding the brass latch firmly into place with a quiet, definitive click, not out of hatred or malice, but because some profound lessons can only ever be truly learned in the dark.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.